My sister stood up at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of our entire family, and told them I'd abandoned my own children. She said it with tears in her eyes, which was the masterstroke, because tears make a lie look like grief. She said that while I was off doing whatever it is you do, she'd been the one raising my kids. That I never called, that I never came, that my children cried for a mother who'd chosen her career over them, and that she, my loving sister, had stepped in to be the mother I refused to be. And she looked around that table at every face I'd known my whole life, and I watched them believe her. My own father, my aunts. I watched the belief move across their faces like a shadow crossing a field. I didn't defend myself. That's the part nobody understands. My sister had just accused me, in front of everyone I loved, of the worst thing you can say about a mother. And I set down my fork, and I said calmly, "That's not what happened, and I think you know it isn't." And then I let it go. I didn't launch into the fight she wanted, didn't produce the phone or start listing dates, didn't give her the screaming match that would have let everyone remember me as the unstable one who ruined Thanksgiving. Because I'd learned something a long time ago. In a job where being calm under a false accusation can be the difference between life and death, you cannot win an argument against a confident lie in the heat of the moment. The lie is loud and it's emotional, and it's already been rehearsed. But a lie has a weakness the truth doesn't. A lie can't survive the records, and my sister, in her confidence, had just built her entire story on top of a mountain of documentation she'd forgotten existed. Sign-in sheets, visitor logs, call records, a paper trail 2 years deep that she never imagined anyone would pull. She'd told a story about who came for my children, and there were records of exactly who came for my children, and they did not say what she said they said. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to how a lie this big got built in the first place, because it didn't start at that dinner table. It started 2 years earlier, with a deployment, a custody favor, and a sister who saw an opening I never imagined she'd take. My name is Major Claire Donnelly, and the thing you need to know about my job is that I'm a military police officer, an investigator, specifically. For 11 years, my work has been building cases, gathering evidence, establishing timelines, documenting who was where and when, and knowing, down to my bones, that in any dispute the physical record outlasts the loudest voice. I have watched confident, tearful, completely convincing people tell stories that fell apart the instant someone pulled the logs. I didn't know, sitting at that Thanksgiving table, that I was about to become the subject of my own kind of investigation. But the instinct was already there. When my sister told her tearful lie, the investigator in me didn't think how could she. It thought there are records, and the records won't match. I was 39 that year. I have 2 children, Ben, who was 10, and Sophie, who was 7. And 2 years before that Thanksgiving, I'd faced the hardest situation a single military parent can face. I received orders for a 9-month deployment, and I had no co-parent to leave my kids with. Their father had died when Sophie was a baby, a car accident, sudden and devastating, and in the years since, I'd raised them alone between assignments, patching together childcare, leaning on the tight margins that single military parents live on. When the deployment orders came, I needed a family caregiver, and my younger sister Diana volunteered. I want to be fair to who Diana was at the start, because the story doesn't make sense otherwise. When she offered, I was grateful, and I was relieved, and I had no reason to suspect her. She lived in our hometown, near our father and the rest of the family. She didn't have kids of her own. She said she'd love to take Ben and Sophie for the deployment, keep them in a stable home, near their grandfather and cousins, in a town they knew. It was, on its face, a generous offer and the best option I had. I signed a family care plan making Diana the temporary caregiver. I set up an allotment from my pay to cover the kids' expenses, and I deployed, trusting my sister with the 2 most precious things in my life. Here's the part I didn't see coming, the part I've had a long time to understand since. Diana had spent her whole life feeling like the lesser sister. I was the one who'd gotten out, joined the army, made rank, done something. She'd stayed home, and she'd nursed a quiet resentment about it for years. I knew that vaguely, the way you know the weather in a place you don't live. What I didn't understand was that taking my children was, for Diana, a chance to finally be the one who mattered, to be the hero of the family story. And somewhere in those 9 months, being the kid's caregiver stopped being a favor she was doing for me and became an identity she wasn't willing to give up. She started to believe her own performance, and a person who has decided they're the real parent will, eventually, need the actual parent to be the villain, because you can't be the hero who saved the children unless there's someone they needed saving from. The distance made it easy for her. This is the part that still makes my chest tight, because I did not abandon my children. I called constantly, every chance the deployment allowed, across a brutal time difference, whenever I could get to a phone or a connection. But here's what I learned much later. Diana controlled the access. When I called, she'd often say the kids were asleep, or at an activity, or having a hard day and it's better not to upset them. She'd promise to have them call back and they wouldn't. She was, I now understand, deliberately limiting my contact with my own children, and then, to those same children, framing the limited contact as my absence. Your mom didn't call again. Your mom's too busy. I'm the one who's here. She was building the abandonment narrative in real time, in 2 directions at once, to the family and to my own kids' hearts. And I, 10,000 miles away, mid-deployment, focused on a demanding and sometimes dangerous job, missed the pattern until it was well established. I'd feel the wrongness of it, the calls that didn't get returned, the way the kids seemed more distant each time I did reach them. A comment Sophie made once that sounded like someone else's words in her small mouth, but I explained it away. I told myself Diana was overwhelmed, that the kids were just adjusting, that I was being paranoid because I missed them so much. I gave my sister the benefit of the doubt because she was my sister, and she was doing me the biggest favor of my life. That benefit of the doubt was the door she walked through. By the time I came home, the story was already set in the family's mind. Diana, the selfless sister, holding down the fort while Claire was gone, the kids, thriving under her care, and me, the mother who was always away. I came home to children who were wary of me at first, who'd been subtly taught that my homecoming was a disruption rather than a joy. That was the cruelest thing, not what she did to my reputation, but what she'd done to my kids' sense of me. It took months of patient, gentle love to rebuild what 9 months of quiet poison had damaged. But I rebuilt it. I want to tell you what that rebuilding actually looked like, because it's the part of the story I'm proudest of, and it's the part that mattered 1,000 times more than any records. When I came home, Sophie, my baby, 7 years old, was shy with me. Shy. With her own mother. She'd hang back and look to Diana before she'd hug me, and the first time that happened I had to go into the bathroom and run the water so no one would hear me cry. Ben, older, was more guarded, a little cool, testing me the way a kid does when he's been told a story about you and is trying to figure out if it's true. Neither of them said you abandoned us. They were children. They didn't have those words, but I could feel the shape of what they'd absorbed, the low-grade doubt that had been planted in them about whether their mother really loved them, really wanted them, really would have come home if she'd had a choice. So I didn't defend myself to them, either. You can't argue a child out of a feeling. Instead, I just showed up, relentlessly, in the small daily ways that are the only language of love a child actually believes. I made the breakfasts. I did the school runs. I was there at pickup every single day, standing at the fence where they could see me. I learned Sophie's new favorite songs and Ben's new video game. I sat through the homework and the meltdowns and the bedtimes. I didn't lecture them about how much I loved them. I just became, again, the fixed and reliable center of their days, and slowly, over weeks, over months, they came back to me. There was a night, maybe 3 months in, when Sophie woke up from a bad dream, and, without thinking, without hesitating, ran to my room, and not to the memory of Diana's. She climbed into my bed and fell back asleep against me, and I lay awake the rest of the night holding my daughter, and crying with a relief I can't describe. I'd gotten her back. I'd gotten them both back. The bond between a good mother and her children is deeper than any story a resentful aunt can tell. But it isn't automatic. You have to go back and re-earn it, day by day, and I did. Ben and Sophie came back to me, all the way back, because I'd shown them the truth of who I was in the only currency children trust, showing up, over and over, until the story someone told them couldn't compete with the mother standing in front of them. And I genuinely thought, that once I was home and things settled, Diana would let the caregiver identity go, and we'd return to being sisters. She didn't. And that Thanksgiving, a full year after I'd come home, she made her move. Because I'd started talking about my next assignment, and I think she saw the possibility of me leaving again, and she wanted the family firmly on her side, wanted the abandonment narrative locked in as accepted fact, maybe wanted to lay groundwork for something worse down the line. So she stood up at the table and she told them all that I'd abandoned my children, and she cried, and they believed her. Let me take you back to that dinner, and what I did after I set down my fork. I did not fight her at the table. I said my one calm sentence, "That's not what happened, and I think you know it isn't." And I watched it land as weakly as calm truth always lands against loud tears. I saw my father look away from me. I saw my aunt reach over and squeeze Diana's hand. I understood in that moment that I had already lost the room, and that nothing I could say in the heat of that dinner would win it back. So I made a decision. I would not perform my innocence for people who'd chosen to believe my guilt. I would prove it. And there's a difference I've built a career on. Performance is what you do in the moment to look innocent, and it rarely works, because the guilty perform too. Proof is what you build quietly, afterward, out of records that don't have feelings and can't be argued with. I excused myself early from that dinner. I gathered my kids and I went home, and I did not slam a single door. And that night, after Ben and Sophie were asleep, I sat down at my kitchen table and I started doing what I do for a living. I started building the case. I made 2 lists. The first was every point in Diana's story, every specific claim. Claire never called. Claire never visited. Claire abandoned them. Diana raised them alone. The kids cried for their absent mother. I wrote each claim down like allegations in a file, because that's what they were. And the second list was the evidence that would touch each claim. Because here's the thing my sister had forgotten, in her confidence, in her tears. Every one of her claims was about something that leaves a record. Claire never called. There were phone records. My carrier kept logs of every call I'd made, including the dozens and dozens to Diana's number during the deployment. The calls she'd told everyone never happened. The calls she'd let ring out or cut short. The logs wouldn't show what was said, but they'd show, in cold timestamps, that I had called over and over and over from the other side of the world. Claire never visited. I'd had 2 periods of leave during and around that deployment, and I'd spent both with my children, and there was proof. Because here was the piece Diana had completely forgotten. During the deployment, Ben and Sophie were in school, and I'd made a point, on my leave, of being the parent who showed up. And schools keep records, sign-in sheets for visitors, logs of who picked up the children, records of parent-teacher conferences and who attended, emergency contact forms and who was listed, 2 years of documentation about exactly which adults were present in my children's daily lives, and it was all sitting in a school district's files, waiting for someone to ask. And there was more, once I started pulling threads. The allotment from my pay that had funded the kids' care, documented, showing I'd been financially providing for them the entire time, not abandoning them. Emails and messages I'd sent Diana about the kids, asking about their days, their grades, their doctor's appointments, the messages of an involved mother, not an absent one, all time-stamped, all preserved. Cards and packages I'd mailed the kids from overseas, some of which I had shipping records for. A mother who'd abandoned her children does not mail them a package every few weeks with tracking numbers. The abandonment story required all of that not to exist, and all of it existed. The next morning I made 2 calls. The first was to the one person in my family I still trusted, my cousin Marcus, who'd been at the dinner and who, I'd noticed, had not joined the chorus. Marcus was quiet, observant, the kind of person who watched a room instead of performing to it. I called him and I didn't ask him to take my side. I just asked him one question. Did what Diana said sit right with you? There was a pause, and then Marcus said, No, it didn't. Because I remember you calling me from overseas, asking me to check on the kids because Diana wasn't returning your calls. I remember that, Claire. And when she was crying at that table yesterday, I kept thinking, that's not what I remember. Relief flooded through me, not because I needed Marcus to believe me, but because his memory was itself a piece of evidence, a contemporaneous account, a witness. I asked him if he'd be willing to say what he remembered, if it came to that. He said yes. And then Marcus said something that stayed with me, something that helped me understand what I was actually up against. You know what got everybody, Claire? It wasn't the words. It was that she cried. The second she started crying, everybody's brain just switched off. Nobody stopped to think, wait, does this even match what we know? They just saw the tears and felt bad and picked a side. He was right, and it was the most useful thing anyone said to me in that whole ordeal, because it named the exact thing I was fighting. I wasn't fighting a set of facts. I'd have won a fight about facts easily. I was fighting the way a room full of loving people stops thinking the moment someone performs pain convincingly. You can't out-argue tears in real time. You can only come back later, when the tears have dried, with something that doesn't cry and doesn't flinch, and doesn't care how anyone feels. A record. That conversation with Marcus is when I fully committed to the long game. He'd shown me why the dinner table was unwinnable, and therefore why the records were the only battlefield that mattered. The second call was to a family lawyer, because I'd realized, lying awake, that this might not stop at a ruined reputation. A sister who'd spent 2 years building an abandonment narrative and had just gone public with it at a family gathering might be building towards something more. A custody challenge maybe, or an attempt to establish herself as the real parent in some formal way. I wanted to understand my position and protect my kids before Diana made a move I couldn't undo. The lawyer's name was Grace Okafor, and her office was busy and full of files, and she was maybe 60, sharp and calm, and she listened to my whole story without interrupting once. When I finished, she took off her reading glasses and set them down. Major Donnelly, I've done family law for 31 years, and I'm going to tell you 2 things. The first is that what your sister is doing is more dangerous than it feels. Right now it's a story at a dinner table. But abandonment narratives like this are exactly what people build before they file for custody or guardianship. They establish the story in the family and the community first, so that when they make a legal move, the groundwork is already laid. You are right to take this seriously now, before she does. And the second thing? She almost smiled. The second thing is that your sister has made the classic mistake of the confident liar. She built her story about things that are documented. Phone records, school records, financial records. Most people accused of abandonment have to fight a swamp of he said, she said, feelings against feelings. You don't. You have a paper trail 2 years deep that contradicts her at every single point, and you happen to be a professional investigator who knows exactly how to assemble it. She told a story about the records. Let's go get the records. Over the next few weeks, because even this takes weeks, not an afternoon, I built the case the way I'd build any case, methodically, completely, and without tipping my hand. And I have to be honest that these were hard weeks, harder emotionally than professionally, because the professional part was almost easy. Pulling records is what I do. The hard part was the silence from my family. Because after that Thanksgiving, my family pulled back from me, not all at once, and not with any dramatic confrontation, just a cooling, a slowness to return calls, an absence at gatherings I used to be part of. My father, especially, he and I had always been close, and now there was a distance in his voice when we spoke, a disappointment he didn't state but couldn't hide, and it hurt more than anything Diana had said at the table. My own father believed I'd abandoned my children. That was the wound underneath all the others. I want to be honest about how much that cost me, because the vindication stories people love can make it sound like the calm, disciplined choice is easy once you decide on it. It wasn't. There was a night about 2 weeks in when my father didn't invite me to a small family birthday gathering, a gathering I would always have been part of, and I found out about it afterward, from a photo someone posted, my whole family together, smiling, without me. And I sat in my kitchen, and I sobbed. because I understood in that moment that I hadn't just been accused of something, I'd been exiled. The lie had done its work, and the family I'd belonged to my whole life had quietly closed around Diana and left me outside. And every fiber of me wanted to pick up the phone and call my father and beg, to cry into the phone, to list every call I'd made, every package I'd sent, to make him feel my innocence. I didn't. I put the phone down. Because I knew from 11 years of watching people plead their innocence in interview rooms, that desperation reads as guilt to a person who's already decided, and that a tearful phone call from me would just look like the unstable sister trying to manipulate her way back in. My father didn't need my feelings. He needed the records. And the records weren't ready yet, so I let myself be exiled for a few more weeks, alone with my kids, holding the line, trusting that the truth I was assembling would do what my tears never could. It was the loneliest stretch of my life, lonelier than any deployment, because on deployment at least I knew my family was behind me. Now I had to build my case knowing they weren't, and trust that the case would bring them back. The temptation in those weeks to just call him and plead my case, to pour out the truth in a desperate emotional rush, it was enormous. But I knew, from a career of watching it, that pleading reads as guilt to someone who's already decided, and that the only thing that would move my father was not my tears but the truth, laid out cold and complete and undeniable. So I stayed quiet, and I gathered, and I let my family think what they thought, for a few more weeks, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I pulled the phone records first. My carrier could provide detailed logs going back through the deployment, and there it was, in black and white, call after call after call to Diana's number, dozens of them, clustered in the evenings her time, which was the middle of the night mine, a mother calling home whenever the deployment let her, at any hour, again and again. The records also showed, tellingly, how many of those calls were very short or showed no connection, the calls she'd let ring out or cut off. The pattern was undeniable to anyone who knew how to read it. This was not a woman who never called. This was a woman calling constantly and being screened. Then I went to the school, and this was the piece that turned everything, because Grace had been right about how much schools document. As the children's mother and legal parent, a status Diana had never actually displaced, whatever story she told, I had every right to their educational records. I requested the visitor sign-in logs, the pickup records, the conference attendance, the emergency contact forms, for the whole period in question, and when the school pulled them up, the records told the true story so clearly it took my breath away. I remember sitting in the school's front office, a place I'd been so many times, while a kind administrative assistant printed page after page for me, and as the pages came out of the printer, I read my own history with my children, written in the district's neutral bureaucratic hand, and it undid me a little, right there in the office. Because there was my signature, on the visitor log, dated to a day during my leave when I remembered exactly what we'd done. I'd surprised Sophie at lunch, and she'd been so happy she'd cried, and here was the proof that I'd been there, in the school's own records, a fact that existed independent of any story anyone told. There was my name on the parent-teacher conference sign-in, the conference Diana had later implied I'd skipped. There was the emergency contact form with me listed as the primary parent, in my own hand. Page after page of a mother present in her children's lives, printing out of a machine in a school office, and I had to keep wiping my eyes so I could read them, because each page was both evidence and memory, both a weapon against Diana's lie, and a reminder of every moment she'd tried to convince my own children hadn't mattered or hadn't happened. The sign-in sheets showed my name, my signature, on the days I'd visited during my leave, exactly when I'd said I was there. They showed me at the parent-teacher conferences I'd attended. But they showed something even more damning to Diana's story. They showed the pattern of the whole 2 years. And what the pattern revealed was that yes, Diana had done a great deal of the day-to-day pickup during the deployment, which was true, she was the caregiver. That was the arrangement. But the records also showed me present at every opportunity my deployment allowed, and, crucially, they showed that the moment I was home, I was the one signing in, picking up, showing up. The narrative that I'd abandoned my children and Diana had raised them was contradicted by 2 years of a school district's own meticulous documentation. The records didn't show an absent mother. They showed a mother doing everything a deployment would allow, and then stepping fully back into her children's daily lives the instant she was able. And there was one more thing in the school records, the detail that made it airtight, and it was Diana's own words that hanged her. In requesting my kids' records, I found a form Diana had filled out during the deployment, and on it, in a section about the family situation, she'd written a note referring to me as the children's mother who was deployed in service and would resume primary care upon return. In her own handwriting during the deployment, in an official school document, my sister had described me not as an absent abandoner, but as a deployed mother who would resume primary care. She'd documented the truth herself, 2 years earlier, before she'd decided to become the hero of a different story. She'd forgotten it existed. I had it now, and I sat in that office holding it and thought, this is always how it happens. The confident liar always leaves behind, somewhere, a moment when they told the truth without thinking, because at the time the truth was just the truth, and they had no idea they'd need it to be something else later. Then 2 things happened close together. The first was that Grace confirmed my fear. Diana had, in fact, begun quietly exploring a guardianship petition. She'd consulted a lawyer of her own. The Thanksgiving performance hadn't been a one-off outburst. It had been the public phase of a plan to establish herself as the children's real parent and to challenge my custody, using the abandonment narrative as the foundation. If I'd done what my instinct at the dinner table wanted, fought loudly, then let it drop, assumed it was just family drama, I might have found myself, months later, facing a custody challenge with a family already primed to testify that I'd abandoned my kids. Instead, I'd spent those weeks building the exact evidence that would make such a challenge collapse before it began. The second thing was that I had to decide how to end it. And here's where the discipline mattered most, because I had 2 options, and only one of them was right. The loud option was to detonate everything at the next family gathering, to stand up the way Diana had, to spread the phone records and the school logs across the table, to play her own handwritten form back to her in front of everyone, to have my public vindication and watch her burn. Part of me wanted that badly. She'd humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. There was a justice in humiliating her back the same way. But that wasn't the move, and my training knew it even when my anger didn't. Because a public detonation would make me the person who ruined another family gathering, would turn the family's discomfort toward me, and, this mattered most, would drag my children closer to a conflict I was determined to keep them out of. Ben and Sophie were the whole point. They were the ones who'd already been poisoned once against their own mother. I would not make them the audience or the trophy of a war between the adults who were supposed to love them. So I did it the disciplined way. I gave the complete evidence package to my lawyer, and I had Grace send a formal, unemotional letter to Diana and to Diana's lawyer, laying out the documentation, making clear that any guardianship or custody challenge would fail against this record, and putting her on notice that the abandonment narrative was demonstrably false and that continuing to spread it, particularly in any legal or formal context, would have consequences. It was calm, it was complete, and it ended Diana's plan instantly, because there is nothing a confident liar can do when the records arrive except stop. And then, separately, quietly, I dealt with the thing that actually mattered to me, my family. I did not call a big meeting. I went to my father, alone, and I sat down with him, and I did not cry or plead. I simply laid the records in front of him, the phone logs, the school sign-in sheets, and Diana's own handwritten form describing me as the deployed mother who would resume primary care. I let him read them in silence. And I watched my father's face change, watched the disappointment turn to confusion, turn to a dawning, sick understanding, and then to something like grief, because he was realizing that he had believed a lie about his own daughter, had looked away from me at that table, had let it happen. "Why didn't you say something at dinner?" he asked me quietly. "Why did you let us all believe it for weeks?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me at dinner, Dad," I said. Diana was crying. I was calm. In that room, on that day, her tears beat my truth every time. I didn't need you to believe my feelings. I needed you to see the records. And now you have. He put his head in his hands, and then he said the thing I'd been waiting weeks to hear, the thing that mattered more than any legal victory. I'm sorry, Claire. I should have known better. You've never been anything but a good mother, and I forgave him, fully and immediately, because he'd been deceived by someone he trusted, and because a father who says he's sorry and means it is worth keeping. I won't pretend the family healed cleanly, because real life doesn't work that way. The truth spread through the family the way the lie had, but slower, the way truth always travels slower than a good story. Some believed the records immediately. Some were embarrassed at having been fooled, and dealt with that embarrassment by staying distant, which is its own kind of cowardice I've had to make peace with. But the people who mattered, my father, Marcus, the ones with the honesty to face that they'd been wrong, came back to me, and those relationships, tested and repaired, are stronger now than they were before. Diana and I are not in contact. That's the hardest part, and I won't dress it up. She never admitted what she'd done, never apologized, retreated instead into a wounded silence and a story, which I hear she still tells to anyone who'll listen, that I'd turned the family against her. I've made my peace with it, mostly. She was my sister, and I mourn the sister I thought I had, and I've accepted that a person who could do what she did to my children over her own resentment was not, in the end, someone I could keep in my life or theirs. I don't hate her. I just no longer leave a door open for her to walk through and do it again. I did not gloat, not once, and it's the thing I'm most proud of. There was never a triumphant scene, never a moment where I got to watch Diana's face fall in front of everyone. I chose the quiet ending on purpose, because the loud one would have cost my children, and my children were the entire point. Vindication that hurts your kids isn't vindication, it's just revenge wearing vindication's clothes. What I chose instead, the calm, complete, private dismantling of the lie, and the protection of my kids from the whole ugly war, that's the thing I can live with, and the thing I could look Ben and Sophie in the eye about. Life settled, the way it does. My relationship with my children is whole and deep and unshakable now, the 9 months of poison fully undone, replaced by years of a mother showing up, every single day, in all the documented and undocumented ways. Ben's a teenager now, Sophie close behind, and they know exactly who their mother is, because they've lived it. That's the record that matters most in the end. Not the school logs or the phone bills, but the daily, lived, accumulating record of a mother who kept showing up. That one no one can forge and no one can take away. People ask me sometimes how I stayed so calm at that dinner table, letting my sister destroy my reputation in front of everyone without fighting back. And I tell them the truth. It wasn't that I didn't want to fight. It's that I know, from a career of watching accusations rise and fall, that you never win against a confident lie by being louder than it in the moment. The lie is built for that moment. It's rehearsed for it. You beat a lie by outlasting it, by staying calm, gathering the records it forgot about, and letting the cold, patient, undeniable truth arrive on its own schedule, when the emotions have cooled and people can actually see. The truth doesn't need to win the dinner. It just needs to win the record. And the record is forever. She told them I abandoned my children, so I went and got the proof of every time I showed up. And it turned out I'd shown up so many times, in so many documented ways, that her whole story couldn't survive a single afternoon in the school district's files. Thank you for spending this time with me. If Claire's story reached something you've lived through, or someone you love who's been branded with a lie they couldn't fight in the moment, I'd be honored if you shared it, because someone out there is sitting at a table right now, being told a false story about themselves in front of the people they love, and they need to know that the moment isn't where you win, the records are. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever been accused of something false by someone confident and tearful, and had to wait for the truth to catch up? And if you'd like to hear more stories about quiet strength, hard-won vindication, and the patient power of the truth, I hope you'll subscribe and join me here. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people who've truly earned a place in your life.